The air smells of wet straw, boiled cabbage, and tallow smoke. A bell tolls somewhere thin and patient, then recedes. Your fingertips are gritty with earth as you steady yourself on a gatepost that has known 100 seasons. You are standing at the lip of a village that refuses the conveniences you know. You feel the cold slip into your sleeves like an accusation. You might not survive this place the way you survived the city you left. If you want more journeys like this, leave a like now, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. For tonight, lower your lights, pull a blanket up to your chin if you wish, and step with me into a world that measures time in bell strokes and harvest. You arrive as if by remembering, because that is how these immersive trips work. You are drawn by scent and sound into a lane that wants to keep its secrets. The lane is muddy, not the polite mud of a park, but a living, sticky thing that clings to the soles of your shoes. A child runs by with a wooden hoop and a laugh that ends in a cough. The courtyard ovens are exhaling a sour and yeasty breath that tells you bread is being saved from burning rather than being perfected. A dog barks, low and suspicious, and a woman at the well wipes her hands on her skirt the way someone wipes their brow from the same worry every day. There is tenderness here, but it is a tenderness folded into survival. This is not an idea, it is a pressure on your ribs. We will wander through the day and the duties that make a village stay alive. We will touch the instruments of labor, breathe the smoke from chimneys, stand in a chapel where prayers are both hope and regulation, witness a sickness that runs like a rumor, and judge what it asks of a community. We will sit on the ground by a carpenter as he shapes a cradle and hear him tell a story that is more law than lullaby. When we return, you may find your warm shower absurdly miraculous. For now, listen to the soft scrape of a cart and let the world move around you. You wake with the light that the sky decides to give. The morning smells of pottage and damp wool. You move because the village moves, not because an alarm commands you. A neighbor, Tomas, calls from his doorway, voice thick with sleep and already tired from the work to come. "You up yet?" he asks. You answer, though you are not obliged to. The sound of voices is already a rhythm. Agnes, who keeps the flock, passes and tugs at a lamb that has learned to nurse with impatient teeth. "Careful," she says, and you feel the funny sharpness of a needle of hay in your palm. The routine is a choreography of small dangers and habitual comforts. There is no time carved out as leisure. Even the children know to carry wood. You meet Edda at the trough. Her hands are raw in a way that shame cannot hide. She says, "You should not have come with wet shoes. The fever does not like damp." You ask what fever? Her eyes shudder, and she names a disease like a superstition. The mention clings to the air. You exchange news with the miller, Yorick, who inspects the sacks like a priest reading scripture. "Grain is less this season," he says. "You will see it in the bread." The dialogue between neighbors is a ledger. You speak, they speak. The village keeps accounts with words as much as with sacks. Backstory of you, the traveler, arrives like a flash of memory, and it needs to be honest. You grew up in a suburb of a city that smells faintly of petrol and freshly cut grass, a child of steady electricity and predictable plumbing. Your family had rituals that involved thermostats and prescriptions rather than fasting and talismans. You learned to read in a light that never judged your eyes. You were trained to believe in hygiene as a daily performance of convenience rather than a hard-earned shield. There was a teacher who taught you about pandemics as data and not as stories of neighbor burials. You studied a discipline that prized sanitation systems you rarely thanked. A loss arrived in the form of an older relative whose hands trembled from overwork, and whose stories you never fully learned because you were in a rush to be comfortable. You carry with you a quiet regret that you knew the cost of ease but not the price made in decades of routine. Edda has her own lines, cut into her palms, that tell a backstory without a narrator. She was a midwife once apprenticed to Sister Lenora in a convent across a ridge. As a child, she ran with boys who carved whistles from bone. Later, she lost a brother at sea, and his absence is a soft wound that shapes her care for newborns. She names herbs by scent and remembers the proportions of broths by feel. Her backstory fits into 3 parts. First, an early childhood marked by play and a secret yearning for maps. Second, an apprenticeship that taught her to measure life with pulse and urine, taught her to translate a cry into a prognosis. Third, a steady present where loss and skill balance like a scale always leaning toward duty. When she speaks to a birthing woman, she does so with a voice that has already learned how to perform its courage. The forge is the village drum. The blacksmith, Halvard, welcomes you with the smell of hot iron and a voice that has the grain of coal in it. You watch the bellows breathe, a leather belly inflating and collapsing in a rhythm that keeps time better than any beater. Clock, you know? The hammer descends and the metal sings, a ringing note that feels like the world being remade in miniature. "Bring the plowshare," Halvard tells his apprentice, a boy named Marga who is all elbows and bright curiosity. "Do not hurry the steel, it will break if you force it." They exchange sentences like sparks. You ask about hardening. He explains the process in a practical way. "Why quench in water and not oil?" you ask. "Because water cools quicker," Halvard says, "but you must know the temper, or the blade will shatter." Marga asks, "How can you know the temper by color?" Halvard holds up the glowing metal, watches the hue, and answers, "The color tells you what the steel did inside. You learn to see what is invisible to others." You lean forward as he plunges the steel into the trough. The sizzle is an oath. The explanation is short but exact. For 20 heartbeats, you see a process that feels like a rite and a recipe at once. A technical aside is necessary here because some procedures anchor life. The process of grinding grain into flour involves a millstone pair, where the upper stone turns on a spindle and the lower stone stays. Grain is fed through a hopper and caught between furrows that shear it into meal. The operator adjusts the distance between stones with a wooden wedge to change texture. If the stones are too close, the flour overheats and becomes gluey. If too far, the grain slips. A miller measures time by the dust and the rhythm of a wheel. It is unglamorous but precise and essential. By the time the sun climbs, you have already learned that work in this place is an argument with weather. Your hands are marked by pressure where you lift things in a way your modern life did not require. You help with sheaves and discover muscles that have been asleep, and the work speaks back with small complaints. "You will need to rest your wrists," Agnes says, "or they will tell you later that they cannot hold a needle." You ask what she means, and she shows you a band of scar tissue on her palm, pale as a riverbed. The dialogue here becomes a lesson on the body as ledger of labor, where pain is documented in callus rather than in doctor visits. Midday brings the chapel and a different kind of structure. The chapel smells of wax, bees, and old wood. The priest, Brother Martin, moves through the space like a slow current. He rings a small bell, not to mark time, but to mark submission to a pattern that binds the village identity. You stand with others, breath forming small clouds in a place where the sun has not yet found the leaded glass. The ritual is a gathering of memory and admonition. Brother Martin's sermons are not only prayers, they are practical directions about harvest and the sharing of grain and the censure of gossip. "Our order is to care for both the soul and the common well," he tells the congregation. A woman near you, Marga the apprentice from the forge, clasps her hands and seems to count sins like beads of a rosary. In the chapel, dialogue expands into the social contract. A man named Halvard stands and speaks of a dispute over a boundary hedge. He speaks with a voice that carries the grit of the road and a resignation that pleases no one. "He claims what is mine," Halvard says, "and so he takes my hedge." Brother Martin listens and replies, "You must present witnesses. The law in truth is a thing we rehearse together." The exchange shows how disputes are mediated with both religion and neighbor testimony. Decisions are public and shameful, and they are stored in the memory of the meeting. The day is soft with ordinary dangers until it is not. A rumor enters the lane like a thin wind. Someone says that a cart has returned from the city empty and with faces pale. That word, pale, spreads as if it is contagious. The disease arc begins with small gestures. A child who used to run now stays near the door. The midwife, Edda, is called to a sick house. You stand in a doorway, a witness who is still learning the etiquette of being useful. Edda asks what medicines you have seen. You list modern remedies, ones that rely on sterile environments and chemical authority. Her smile is small and dry. Here, we do with what we have, she says. The first tense moment arrives when a neighbor, Brother Tomas, coughs blood onto a cloth. He is not a named antagonist, but the event makes the threat immediate. You remember the smell of iron and the sound of a cough that sounds like breaking tile. The conflict inside you becomes two things. One part wants to retreat to your modern instincts and call for containment. Another part is soothed by the rhythm of the village. Here, people respond with teas and poultices and practical tenderness. A memory surfaces of your grandfather, who died with a cough you did not witness. Your hands are cold. Scene of dialogue at the sickbed stretches into an argument. "Open the window," you say to Edda. She looks at you with the practical patience of someone who has learned that wind can be both remedy and foe. "If we open it when it rains, we invite chill," she says. "If we keep it closed, the air grows sour." You suggest herbs and sanitation. She counters, "I will sweep, I will dress the wound, but I cannot rest each illness to your modern orders." The exchange goes back and forth, 4 times, each line sharpening both your compassion and your helplessness. The tension holds because there is no panacea and because you are an outsider who thinks in protocols rather than rhythms. There are moments when the village moves from care to public consequence. A child is marked with a rash that blanches the skin. Named individuals gather. Jorik the miller fetches water. Marga brings linen. Halvard sharpens a knife for a minor surgery. You are asked to hold the lantern, and the lamplight makes the faces long and dramatic. The decision is made to isolate the house by closing the latch and posting a watch. This is not law, yet it functions like law. The watchman, Helga, names who will take turns and who will not. Her voice is steady. The isolation is both an act of compassion and of punishment because it brings scarcity. A moment of tension is also internal for you. You are afraid of being accused of making matters worse. The fear is an old animal, and you learn its name when Brother Martin, who carries authority, speaks. "We must decide whether to send for the healer from the manor," he says. "There will be a cost." The decision splits the village into practical accountants and humane risk-takers. Someone named Cecilia says, "We cannot afford the healer and his fees." Another voice, old and patient, Elfric, says, "We cannot afford to lose a child either." The community measures grief against grain. Time moves, and with it, trials. Not legal trials in the paperwork sense, but public reckonings that can revolve around a simple accusation. There is a story about theft. A man, Garin, is accused of stealing grain sacks. The marketplace gathers, and the case is heard in the open. Garin stands with a face that is both defiant and hollow. He speaks first. "I took the sacks because my children were starving," he says. The elder, Marga the Elder One, who remembers a hunger before records, replies, "You broke the trust of all." Garin answers, "Trust is a luxury when children do not sleep." The exchange circles like a hawk. Public shame becomes instruments of order. Brother Martin and Halvard confer quietly. The punishment decided is repair rather than exile. Garin will work off his debt in the manor fields and will be watched. The dialogue in such a public spectacle contains the economy of emotion, where mercy is always conditional. Rituals of life appear like slow threads. There is a wedding between 2 less named people and the village gathers. The bride, named Lysa, smells of lavender because someone thought to tuck a sprig into her hair. The ceremony is small and sewn with practical vows. "I will share bread with you," the groom says, and the bride replies, "I will mend your coat." The promises are earthly. A birth follows weeks later. Edda, the midwife, is present. The birthing scene is tactile. You feel the slick linen, taste the iron of sweat, hear the little sound of a first cry that seems to reset the village meter. Someone in the crowd, Sister Lenora, murmurs a blessing and a petition to saints whose names are known like weather forecasts. The child is named in a way that honors a grandparent and a local saint. The ritual cements lineage the way a rung on a ladder holds a step. One of the darker public rituals is punishment. A man accused of slander is brought to a small platform. The sentence is not always proportionate. He receives a public humiliation that includes being made to stand in the rain for a day with a pot of char assigned to him. The crowd watches. Some are amused, some somber. Agnes, who once had a slanderous accusation aimed at her, holds her tongue as she remembers the taste of public scrutiny. The ritual normalizes cruelty as a way to keep order. The day when you decide to leave the village and aim for the city is a pivot. The road to the city smells different. It is in part human waste and in part the tang of unknown spices arriving on a cart. You meet a traveling merchant named Corin who has a hat covered in dust and a ledger that reads like a small book of countries. He offers you dried figs and a trade story. Cities bring coin and disease and possibilities, he says. You go and you lose the certainty of knowing all your neighbors. He is a worldly voice that softens the edges of the rural certainty you have come to feel. You barter for passage on a cart that takes you along a track where the trees open to a landscape that is both more crowded and lonelier. The urban market is a broad mechanical heart. Stalls pressed together like ribs. There is no single smell, but a layered complexity of fish and smoke and tar and citrus brought from far places. Craftsmen have specializations that read like guild addresses. You visit a tannery and see hides being treated with lime and scraped with curved blades. You speak with a man named Oren who is a tanner. He demonstrates the scraping and explains how lime loosens hair and fat and how the process must be repeated to avoid rot. The vocational description is practical and useful. A civic official, a woman named Sister Lenora who left the country for trade ties, meets you in an alley and warns you that anonymity in the city is different. Here you can disappear into a crowd and find work or trouble, she says. A city scene unfolds in many dialogues. You want a room, and a landlord named Barent negotiates a fee. The haggling is long enough for you to feel the thrift that built a civic center. Barent says 3 coins a week. You counter, 2 is fair for a smaller room. Barent replies, fair is not a coin. The exchange has humor, but also a tension about survival. A moment of civic violence occurs when an argument over a peddler's stall grows and a man is struck. The crowd parts like a sea and then swallows again. You feel the compulsion to flee and the pull of curiosity at the same time. There are 3 critical moments of heightened tension that shape the narrative. Each of these moments is more than an event, they are turning points with internal echoes. First moment of tension comes when a fire erupts in a row of wooden tenements. Flames lick at eaves and threaten to claim the small stores of grain that families keep above their cooking fires. The community forms a human chain. You pass buckets and feel the blister of heat on your forearm. A child, the one who used to play with the hoop, is trapped and rescued by Marga the apprentice. The memory of that child runs with you. You recall a tiny boy from your modern neighborhood who once broke his arm and how a hospital resolved the fear. Here, the fear is louder because the tools are fewer and the time is faster. The decision to risk your life in the chain is a test of loyalty and quick calculation. Second moment of tension arrives with the spread of the fever that started small. It finds Brother Tomas again, and this time the cough deepens into a dangerous list. The village is forced to close its gates to traders and to ration water in ways previously unimaginable. The midwife and the priest argue about how to care for the sick, each with a perspective hammered by different priorities. You sit with a woman named Helga as she counts names in an old book of the dead. They list each loss like a ledger. The pain is arithmetic now. You think of modern ICU wards and feel the absence of them like a missing tooth. The arguments between the healer and the priest are more than administrative.
They are about whose hand holds authority in the body of the community. Third moment of tension unfolds with a public accusation of witchcraft when a neighbor, old and solitary, is blamed for a failed crop. The accusation moves quickly from suspicion to ritual. A small tribunal assembles with Brother Martin officiating and a jury of neighbors that includes Halvard, Yorick, and Agnes. The accused, an old woman named Rowan, speaks in a voice that is fragile and steeped in herbs. She says, "I sing to the seeds and wake them from sleep." The crowd hears her words and hears them as threat. The debate is thunderous and small. Testimonies are given. The defense is not what modern courts would call adequate. The decision about Rowan will be either exile or a public penance that will leave her alive but humiliated. This moment shows how fear can turn cultural knowledge into accusation. Throughout the narrative, we name people because communities remember through names. You meet Thomas, Edda, Brother Martin, Agnes, Yorick, Halvard, Marga, Corin, Lysa, Garin, Helga, Orin, Barent, Cecilia, Elfric, Sister Lenora, Corin the merchant, Rowan the merchant. Each has specific tasks. Thomas fetches water. Edda delivers children. Tends the sick. Brother Martin conducts rituals. Agnes keeps sheep. Jorik runs the mill. Halvard tends the forge. Marga apprenticed to the smith. Corin travels trade routes. Lysa prepares bread for weddings. Garin will till in penance. Helga watches the gate. Orin scrapes hides. Barent rents rooms. Cecilia counts the grains at the manor. Elfric offers counsel at meetings. Sister Lenora records donations. Rowan gathers herbs in secret. The network of names creates a sense of community so real that absence is felt like a wound. At one point, you witness a small court over an infraction that is mostly about public order. The judge, a reeve from the manor named Reynold, listens as Jorik explains the theft, and Garin says he stole to feed his children. The debate is quiet and brutal. "If I punish the poor without mercy," Reynolds says, "I punish the whole village because the poor are my workforce." The sentence aims to repair, not destroy. It is a kind of practical mercy, but carries the heavy hand of social control. There are details of craft and routine that deserve methodical description because they were survival. The making of soap is simple chemistry. Ashes from the hearth are mixed with water to create lye. Animal fat is slowly heated and combined with the lye until the mixture thickens and fats saponify into soap. The soap is then poured into molds and left to cure for weeks. The resulting bars are coarse but effective. This process is laborious, and it binds the household to a cycle that modern supply chains have long erased. As night returns, the village lies under a sky unfamiliar because it is undimmed. The stars are bright and numerous. You feel small and very awake. The lack of artificial light has a consequence you did not anticipate. Dreams come easily, and sleep is both heavier and lighter when you wake. You remember a moment in a small house where a family shares a thin stew around a hearth. The reality of scarcity is soothed by the intimacy of proximity. You ask whether you would return again, and the answers are cloudy. Your own backstory deepens as the trip continues, because you are not merely a tourist. In the past, you had a teacher who said that history is a list of facts. You now realize that history is also a list of smells and pains and small rituals. You recall a childhood illness that made you grateful for clean water. You remember the physiologies of your family, who worked white-collar jobs and still came home with a fatigue that cannot be soothed by a bath. You learn that comfort is a structure that must be built and maintained, and that many hands built it. There are afternoons of low work where dialogue is gentle and human. A woman named Cecilia and an old man, Elfric, sit by a garden and trade proverbs. "A stitch today saves a burden tomorrow," Cecilia says. Elfric, "A burden is only heavy until it meets your shoulder." Their conversation is small and kind, and reminds you that not all of this life is grim. Children play games that teach them balance and cunning. An old man teaches a boy how to identify a wild apple by its leaf. We insert a comment CTA now in the flow because communal reflection matters. If you are starting to feel the cold or are moved by the community, type in the comments one word that you value most in your modern life. Water, heat, medicine, privacy, or perhaps a name of a person. If everyone shares one word, we will build a list that tells us what comfort really means for you. This helps shape future journeys and anchors this episode in our shared curiosity. There is a trading voyage to the city that brings you face to face with new craftspeople and with the impersonal organization of urban life. You visit a scribe who illuminates letters with gold leaf. He names his trade and shows the minute hand strokes that turn words into artifacts. A woman named Lenora reads a ledger of parish donations and notes how gifts track power. The market sells spices that smell of distant places and seeds that do not belong to this soil. The contrast between village and city is not just density, it is a different way to distribute risk. In the city, one can vanish or join a guild. In the village, one is visible and thus accountable but also supported. A wedding and a funeral, sometimes within weeks, shape the emotional roller coaster that is daily life. The funeral for a man named Barent, who died in a small blaze, is an occasion for both stoicism and song. Edda tends to the dead, and their preparation is particular. Feathers, oils, and a covering cloth with a cross stitched in crude thread. The body is wrapped and laid in the earth 3 fingers deep, and the bell tolls for each step. In the funeral, you feel the whole of the community in a constricted place, each person moving in a choreography of grief that is public and private. At the narrative core comes a scene where a small rebellion of will occurs. Garin, who worked his penance, refuses to be absorbed by shame. He speaks to the manor on behalf of the poor and asks for a redesign of how grain stores are supervised so that no one starves on the margin. He collects signatures and with Halvard and Elfric petitions the Reeve. The dialogue is tense and full of raw calculation. "You ask for change," the Reeve says. "Change costs me coin." Garin says, "Change costs the dead less." The exchange marks a turning point where the community tries to adapt instead of merely surviving. As the months fold, you begin to internalize what it means to live here. The epilogue will consider the concrete changes in short increments because
consequences matter. 1 month later, a few things are different. A new schedule for watch rotates names more fairly. The family who lost a child receives extra grain from a neighbor, Jorik, who quietly adjusts the miller's toll. The smith, Halvard, sharpens a donated plowshare so one field can be tilled more quickly. These changes are small and fragile, but they are real. The villagers speak with more honest eyes. The scars remain, and the memory of loss is present, but the work to keep the living is steadier. 3 months later, another layer appears. A small committee has been formed that includes Sister Lenora and Agnes and a farmer named Ewan. They meet in the chapel to write down agreements about water sharing and watch rotations. The community begins to keep a ledger, scribbled and awkward, but effective. Someone named Corin returns from trade with a small medicine of camphor and a recipe that Edda tests and records. The fever has ebbed in some houses but remains in others, a patchwork of outcomes. At market, more barter occurs to accommodate those who cannot pay coin. Garin has regained a place in the fields and is teaching a boy to prune. The village has adapted in small administrative ways that ease daily burdens. 6 months later, the pattern is more evident. The community has constructed a lean storehouse with a simple lock and rotating guardianship. A small herb garden, tended by Rowan and Edda, grows under Sister Lenora's supervision and provides simple tinctures that reduce some symptoms of common ailments. The smith has trained 2 apprentices, and there is less waiting for tool repair. A young woman has birthed a healthy child, and the village celebrates with a small loaf ritual. The ledger of rules is not perfect, and disputes still flare, but the institutional memory has grown. You notice that the people carry themselves with a steadier gait because the work of survival has been spread. The village is still precarious, but less brittle. When you return to your modern bed, the differences land on your chest with new weight. The comforts you once called baseline become revelations.
Running water is incandescent now in your memory. The ease of calling for help becomes a small miracle that you did not pay attention to before. You understand that modern conveniences are not merely conveniences. They are networks of labor and knowledge that someone, somewhere, built and maintained. Your sleep that night is heavy with gratitude, but also with certain guilt. You carry with you a list of names and faces. You think of Edda and her hands, of Halvard, of Brother Martin, of Garin, of Rowan. You see how communal life binds pain and joy closely together. If this journey left you unsettled or quietly grateful, leave in the comments the one comfort you would not trade for decades of rustic courage. It helps us know what you value and shapes what we bring next. Consider subscribing if you want
more nights like this, where smell and sound and small decisions teach more than a page of dates. We will come back to these people not as curiosities, but as teachers in a different ledger of living. The final thought is simple and quiet. Survival is not an abstract test. It is made of small decisions, daily rituals, and the names of the people who choose to share their bread. If you step outside tonight, look up at the stars, and remember how bright they seemed when you were away from electric light. Do not romanticize hardship. Honor those who bore it. Keep your comforts in mind, not as entitlements, but as accumulations of other people's labor and loss. Sleep well, traveler, and when you awake, know that tomorrow's small tasks are the architecture of all the comforts we call modern.